Something snapped in me this week. After 16 months of keeping it together, my heart finally cracked. The plight of the Bibas family struck me so deeply that I do not even know where to place all of these emotions running rampant inside of me. But I know I must speak of them, to give them words, else they will knit up my overfraught heart and bid it break. It's not that Shiri Bibas has a higher status in the sight of God than the other 1,200 Israelis who were murdered on October 7th, or the 800 security personnel who were killed defending the homeland. Then 4-year-old Ariel and 9-month-old Kfir were two of some 40 children who were slaughtered on that day, while dozens more were taken hostage and hundreds orphaned. And it goes without saying that Israeli children have no higher status in the sight of God than Palestinian children. Rather, it is what the Bibas family symbolizes: the concretization and normalization of pure evil in the face of pure innocence that finally crushed me this week. Children are a gift from God, the psalmist wrote, a reward from the Eternal One. Who kills nurslings? Who slays toddlers? When I see red-headed children now, I think of Ariel and Kfir. When I see mothers swaddling their babies, I think of Shiri. I can't get that image out of my head. That terrified look in her eyes as she covers her children with a blanket, hopelessly and helplessly doing what all mothers do, protecting their children from harm. Shiri's flimsy blanket is all that separated Ariel and Kfir from evil. And alas, it was futile. Several weeks after they were taken, the children were strangled to death. Was it in their mother's presence? Did she see them suffocate? Or was she isolated from her children? Did she even know they were murdered? What was her last thought as her life slipped away, releasing her tortured soul heavenward? Oh, horror, horror, horror. Tongue nor heart cannot conceive nor name thee. There are 4 chambers to the human heart. One chamber of my heart is saturated with sadness, another with anger, a third with pride, and the fourth with determination. In the first chamber of my heart, I have been carrying around gnarling sorrow since October 7th. It is a kind of permanent sadness that permeates joy. When one Jew feels pain, all are in pain, our sages teach. The sight of families reuniting after 500 days of hell, it's impossible to describe. The first glimpse of former hostages with their parents, children, and siblings is the most primal, inexpressible joy that a human being can experience. May it be that none of us ever finds ourselves in this state. You see families not only clasping their loved ones in endless interlocking embraces, but also mothers touching their adult children over and over again, as if in a state of shocked disbelief that after so much agony, here they are in their presence. Do you see them touching? You're here. Is this really you? Are you really here? It's a kind of agonized ecstasy. It wasn't as if the hostages embarked upon a dangerous journey by choice and have now reunited after harrowing adventures. They were stolen from their bedrooms. It was a sin against God and a crime against humanity. It should have never happened at all. And furthermore, all the families and all of Israel know that the suffering has not ended. There are still hostages in Gaza. More than half of them will not return to joyous reunions. And there are still years of physical and emotional recovery for the former hostages, their families, and Israeli society. And therefore, all of us who care about Israel, who care about humanity and fellow human beings, who feel connected to and a member of the family of the Jewish people, we too have years of post-traumatic recovery ahead of us. It is deeply sad that something of the carefree joy of life has been stolen from us forever. But there is a second element to my sadness these days. This was the week that finally ended the hope, at least in my lifetime, for a Palestinian state and a Jewish state existing side by side. The Palestinians themselves strangled this fragile hope in its crib. I'm deeply saddened because I am committed to peace and coexistence. I have been my entire life. In all of the 25 years since the collapse of the Oslo Accords, I sustained hope that peace in my lifetime was still possible. We need to continue to work it, reach out, find common ground, and never give up. Even after the Palestinians rejected a state offered to them at Camp David on practically all of the territory they said they wanted, and then launched a brutal killing spree in the restaurants, schools, hospitals, buses, and streets of Israel. Even then, I never gave up hope for a Palestinian state living by Israel's side in peace. Until this week. A community that condones the murder of infants and toddlers. A people that is not horrified by the savagery, that cheers the parading of infant remains, is desperately troubled and suffering from moral miasma and social collapse. Palestinianism is infused with fantasies of conquest and mythologies of victimhood, fueling an endless cycle of violent depravity. In part, encouraged and even funded by perhaps well-meaning but naive Western politicians and NGOs, and glamorized by armchair revolutionaries whose fervor increases the further they are from Gaza. Of course, there are many decent, kind, peace-loving Palestinians. But the polite lie that we tell ourselves over and over again is that Hamas does not represent the Palestinians. It is simply not true. We recite this like a mantra so that we do not have to face the terrible truth that Hamas is the Palestinians. that Palestinianism is more about destroying the Jewish state than creating a state of their own. How many times do we need to hear the word no before we accept that when the Palestinians say no, they mean no? On October 7th, there were only wild celebrations on the streets of Gaza as hostages were enslaved and corpses defiled. Many of the hostages were held in apartment complexes of ordinary civilians. Thousands were in on the secret. No one objected. No one helped the hostages escape. Even after Israel offered a $5 million bounty and safe passage out of Gaza to anyone who could give actionable information. Masses of Palestinian civilians crossed the border on October 7th and stole everything they could find. They knew what to look for. They knew where the valuables were. Many of them were workers on the kibbutzim, offered jobs by their peace-loving neighbors. They knew these kibbutzniks. They knew where they lived. They knew what they possessed. We met former hostage Yocheved Lifshitz in January while in Israel. She told us that she had devoted her entire life to peace. She said to us what she said to all of Israel this week in her eulogy for her 83-year-old husband, Oded, who was murdered in Hamas captivity, severing their 63-year marriage. Oded was a peace activist who drove Palestinians from Gaza to Israeli hospitals for treatment. To my sorrow, Yocheved lamented, we were attacked by those who we helped on the other side. The Palestinians we helped betrayed us, she said. How do you make peace with such neighbors? Never is a long time. But how do you make peace with such neighbors now? I hope I'm wrong. I hope that within a decade you pull out this sermon from our archives, wave it in my face, and offer the incontrovertible truth that I was wrong. Nothing would please me more. I dream of the days of peace, when nations shall beat their swords into plowshares and spears into pruning hooks, when they shall learn war no more, and all shall sit under vine and fig tree, and none shall be afraid. But until such time as the Palestinians themselves say they want peaceful coexistence, two states living side by side, we must cease deluding ourselves that a two-state solution is available now. It is harmful to us and to the Palestinians themselves, who are deprived of the international support they need to create a culture of moderation and toleration, educating their children to love peace rather than hate Jews. The simmering anger building up inside of me for the past 16 months finally broke the restraining walls of the second chamber of my heart this week. The drip, drip release of 33 hostages, only 25 of whom were alive. The extortion demanded by terrorists and paid by Israel for the sake of returning even the dead for proper burial. The sight of the 3 hostages 3 weeks ago, rail thin and looking like survivors of Buchenwald. Israeli doctors said they were only 3 weeks away from heart failure. And then the final indignity of throwing some random remains into what was presented as Shiri Bibas' coffin, and the macabre Hamas ceremony glorifying the strangling of Shiri's 2 children All this caused my indignation to reach a boiling point this week. And to be frank, I actually feel more anger towards Hamas supporters and enablers in the West than at Hamas itself. Because I have no moral expectations of Hamas anymore. Nothing, none. They are our era's Nazis. And if they could, they would kill every last Israeli they could get their hands on. And if they were ever to defeat Israel, they would set their sights on the West. No, my anger is directed more towards our own, the ones from whom we expect so much more. Political leaders ostensibly devoted to liberalism and peace. University presidents, faculty, school principals and teachers, social justice movements, climate activists, international legal establishments, our interfaith friends who ghosted their Jewish dialogue partners after October 7th. I want to reiterate what I have said dozens of times. The loss of any innocent life is a moral catastrophe. I empathize deeply with non-combatants in Gaza and Lebanon who have been killed, maimed, and dislocated. I mourn for them. And I pray that one day their leaders will pave the way to a life of dignity and prosperity for them. But why didn't all those supposedly right-minded people of the West hold Hamas responsible for the suffering of Gazans? Terrorists launch a war, invade a country, kill, kidnap, massacre, and brutalize thousands. And some of those purportedly right-minded people deliriously proclaimed that this is what legitimate resistance looks like. And then they condemn the efforts to defeat these barbarians who use their own people as human shields. You feel nothing for Israeli victims, and your legitimate concerns for the innocents harmed in Gaza never leads you to demand that Hamas return the hostages and surrender? Are you really committed to the well-being of Gaza? Or is it just virtue signaling? Or perhaps raw hatred of Jews? You make up blood libels of genocide, but do not demand the one thing that will stop the suffering? And what happened to your genocide accusations now that Hamas is back in force on the Gaza streets and the masses surround every released Israeli with threat to kill the Jews, terrorizing hostages one last time in ghoulish displays of machismo and bravado? Seizing 9-month-old Kfir and 4-year-old Ariel and 83-year-old peace activist Oded Lifshitz is freedom fighting? This is what you call resistance to colonial oppression? This is what you teach young Americans at Columbia and Harvard? You're going to expel those Barnard students who violated your own policies when they occupied Millbank Hall this week, sending a university worker to the hospital? Or are you going to continue to coddle and encourage anti-Israel, anti-American, and anti-Jewish activity on your campus in violation of your own rules of conduct? See, that's the thing about anti-Jewish hostility, or any blind hatred. It corrodes faith in the institution that tolerates it. The indulgence of Jew hatred on campus undermines confidence in the institutions of higher learning. Irrational anti-Zionism corrodes confidence in the United Nations and international agencies. Prejudice against Israelis by international courts of justice emasculates faith in the institutions of justice. Purposeful subversion of truth and the weaponization of lies against Israel undermine faith in the media. The BBC, once the gold standard, is now viewed by so many as nothing more than a propaganda arm for Hamas. How the mighty have fallen. The third chamber of my heart is filled with pride. There is no people like us. You want to know what Jewish peoplehood looks like? What Jewish peoplehood means? Tens of thousands of flag-waving Israelis line the highways, saluting the funeral procession carrying the Bibas family. The entire country watched live on television. It was as if Shiri, Ariel, Kfir, and Yarden were our kin. Look at how the families of the hostages never shirked, never stopped, never wearied, traveling the world, speaking with whomever could possibly help. How easily could those hostages have been forgotten? But there is something about hostages that drives Jews crazy. Our enemies know we cannot live with it. We love life. We have a primal need to redeem hostages. And thus, for centuries, holding Jewish hostages was a lucrative enterprise. On the one hand, it's a terrible weakness. The IDF defeated the much more formidable Hezbollah in a matter of weeks, while 16 months later, Hamas is still puttering and fluttering. One reason was the absence of Israeli hostages in Lebanon. But on the other hand, this love of life, concern for each other, responsibility that one Jew is commanded to have towards fellow Jews, these are great strengths that our enemies will never understand. Wouldn't you rather live in a society like that? Within a people that will overturn heaven and earth to get you back? A people that cares so much that it will pay obscene price to bring you home? Trading terrorists with blood on their hands for even the dead so that families can have a measure of peace and closure? This is what Jewish peoplehood means. And if you want to live a full Jewish life, and if you want your children and grandchildren to live Jewishly, find a way to plug into that energy of Jewish peoplehood. There is nothing comparable in the entire world. In fact, come with us. Join the synagogue mission to Israel on May 4th. I'll take you to the Nova Festival site, where the music made so many smile. Something will touch you deep inside, walking in the fields where the music died. I'll introduce you to heroes, ordinary people like you and me, who did extraordinary things, saving dozens of others with uncommon courage. And gradually, you will feel your spirit restored. You too will glean strength from that mysterious, magical force we call Jewish peoplehood. We will learn about the massive rebuilding efforts now in the planning stages and together figure out how we, members of the Stephen Wise Free Synagogue, can participate in the renaissance of Jewish life. Get on the plane. It'll change your life. And even years from now, you'll thank me for nudging you. The fourth chamber of my heart bursts with determination. הרופא לשבורי לב ומחבש לעצבותם. God heals the brokenhearted and binds up their wounds, wrote the psalmist. Bonei Yerushalayim Adonai nitchei Yisrael yichanes. God builds up Jerusalem and gathers together the dispersed of Israel. Rest assured, they will not break us. There is no force in the world more powerful than the united spirit of the Jewish people in urgent times. It broke the will of Pharaoh, of history's tyrants who could not fathom how we were still around. And it will eventually break the will of Israel's contemporary enemies. The state of Israel was founded to empower Jews. After 2,000 years, a persecuted, abandoned, decimated people finally rose up and said, enough! The days of murdering and massacring Jews with impunity are over. We will protect ourselves. We will defend our people. We will be masters of our own fate. And we shall return to the ancient homeland and live again. In the words of the prophet Ezekiel, Vayomer Elai hinaveh al ha'atzamot ha'ele. And God said, you dry bones, hear the word of the Eternal One. Behold, I will cause breath to enter into you and lay sinews upon you and cover you with skin, and you shall live again. Ko amar Adonai Elohim. Thus says the eternal God, I will open your graves, O my people, and I will bring you into the land of Israel, and I will put my spirit in you, and I will place you in your own land, and you shall live again, and you shall dwell in the land that I have given unto Jacob my servant. You, your children, and your children's children. Ad olam, forever and ever.